If you look at the total barrels in that 18-mile segment, you end up with roughly 35,000 barrels. Now, does anybody remember how many barrels Exxon claimed that they spilled in this spill? Everywhere from 5,000 to 2,000. Originally it was 1,000. So if all the oil in a segment of the pipeline between the two shutoff valves were to spill in some future spill, 35,000 barrels times 42 gallons per barrel means you could be looking at a spill of 1.4 million gallons, and for Exxon would be in such a terrible condition because there are no shutoff valves between those 2 points. And that's in each 18-mile segment of their 750-mile long pipeline. Now, you've been hearing a lot of information about toxicity and chemicals and how dangerous it is and how safe it is. Basically, Exxon says, don't worry about it, you're going to be fine, and everybody else is telling you, this is not healthy, you need to stay away from this oil. So who's right? Well, I'm not going to get involved in that argument. I'm going to tell you exactly what Exxon says before they broke the pipeline, before it ruptured. This, you may notice, is Wabasca heavy crude oil from January 2013, written by ExxonMobil. I'm not making this stuff up. This is their official material safety sheet for what they call this stuff, Wabasca heavy crude oil, or what we call tar sands. And of course, that's what Canada calls it as well, at its source. So let's look at the composition of Wabasca heavy crude from the Exxon sheet. Well, when it comes to benzene, which we know is a carcinogen, the concentration of benzene in this stuff ranges from 1% to 5%. Now, that may seem like a small percentage to you, but when you think about benzene in, say, 200 or 300,000 gallons, and then you talk about 1% of 300,000 gallons, that's a lot of benzene. So I know there's a lot of new chemical names here for you, but let me try and simplify them for you. First, you've got the polynuclear aromatic hydrocarbons, the famous PAHs that you've heard so much about. The reason you've heard so much about them is because they're toxic, they tend to be long-lasting, they get into the water and the air, and they're really difficult to get rid of because they tend to be absorbed in fats and oils, and they tend to stay in the body for a long time. So for PAHs, Exxon tells us that this particular substance has greater than 0.1%. Well, what does that mean? Is that 1%? Is that 10%? What is greater than 0.1? You may have noticed that Exxon has never told you exactly what is in their substance. They say, hey, you want to know what's in it? Look up the Wabasca heavy crude oil. But unfortunately, the range for this particular substance is so great that it's not very helpful. Let's try another one, like hydrogen sulfide. It's greater than 0.005%. Well, that's a pretty small amount. But they don't actually tell you how much hydrogen sulfide is in this material. Do they know? Well, if they have a jar of crude oil, then they probably know what's in it by now, and they've never bothered to tell us. So some of these others, these are the famous ones: benzene, ethylbenzene, toluene, and xylene. They make up something called BTEX. And you can run the wiki search for BTEX, and it'll tell you that this stuff is really toxic. It's proven to be a carcinogen, but for humans, it's a probable carcinogen, and in fairly small amounts. These other chemicals like cyclohexane, inhexane, naphthalene, these are sort of the lighter side of the composition. And by lighter, I mean they have smaller molecules, lighter than air, and they tend to disperse over a few days, even sometimes a few hours. And then you have sulfur, which is greater than 1%. So when it comes to the BTEX, you've got 1 to 5% benzene. You've also got 1 to 5% toluene, 1 to 5% xylene, and for ethylbenzene, 0.1 to 1%. So you're looking at least 3 to 4% BTEX, and as much as 15 to 20% BTEX, which is not good. So the first thing you should be expecting from Exxon is an analysis of the stuff that you've been poisoned with, and they haven't given that to you. So let's read on some more. It says that the potential physical and chemical effects of Wabasca heavy crude. Now remember, this is the Exxon sheet. I'm not making this stuff up. It says, extremely flammable. Material can release vapors that readily form flammable mixtures. Vapor accumulation could flash and or explode if ignited. And material can accumulate static charge, which may cause an ignition. Well, clearly that's something you'd want to push into the storm drains and out into the wetlands, right? So let's talk about some potential health effects, because that's what we're here for. Everybody's concerned about their health, with good reason. If any of you have been sick in the last 2 months and it looked like flu or it looked like bronchitis, chances are it has something to do with what you've been breathing. So, potential health effects may cause cancer. But remember, Exxon has assured everybody that you're all going to be fine, that it's not going to be a problem. The danger of adverse health effects by prolonged exposure, let's go down a little bit. You've all seen skin dryness and cracking. If swallowed or aspirated, may cause lung damage. Let's see. Hydrogen sulfide, a highly toxic gas, is expected to be present. Not might be present, but is expected to be present. Signs and symptoms of overexposure to hydrogen sulfide include respiratory and eye irritation. Anybody had that problem lately? Dizziness, nausea, coughing, sensation of dryness, pain in the nose, loss of consciousness. That's just a little bit of H2S. Here's one. Odor does not provide reliable indicator of the presence of the hazardous material. May be irritating. Aliphatic hydrocarbon gases, to some extent those are the BTEXs and some of the others, may build up in confined spaces and may cause dizziness, lightheadedness, headache, nausea, and loss of coordination. Continued inhalation may result in narcosis, unconsciousness, and possibly lead to death. But we don't think anybody has died so far. May cause central nervous system depression, and then about the skin, and then we have this careful warning. Exposure to benzene, and we don't know how much benzene you've been exposed to, because benzene is a light gas and can be highly concentrated early on in the spill and then dissipate, probably even before they got the monitors there. It says exposure to benzene is associated with cancer, particularly acute myeloid leukemia and myelodysplastic syndrome, damage of the blood-producing system, and serious blood disorders. So You shouldn't have anything to worry about because all the agencies are here to tell you that the level of exposure that you have had is not injurious to your health, right? Of course, they don't know what level of exposure you've had because when the pipeline broke and you woke up or were first exposed to it, there were no detectors, right? Environmental hazards, toxic to aquatic organisms, may cause long-term adverse effects in the aquatic environment. Therefore, let's push all this oil into an aquatic environment and see what happens. See what else we can learn from Exxon. Inhalation. Immediately remove from further exposure. Get immediate medical assistance. For those providing assistance, avoid exposure to yourself and others. Use adequate respiratory protection. Give supplementary oxygen if available, and assist ventilation, mechanical devices, etc. So here's an interesting one. How did Exxon decide what the radius was from the break to the evacuation point? We haven't seen any models. We haven't seen that they took into account the air or weather conditions. It seems like they came up with, and some people have said, that about 300 feet from the break is the danger point. And I thought about that for a while. Without any models, how do you come up with 300 feet from the break? Well, it just happens to be about the length of a football field. So I figured that's the criteria that was used for your safety. Let's get them about a football field away from the rupture. And that's only in one direction, right? That's just down the